In this week's episode, I'm joined by Toby Mildon, him, workplace inclusion architect. This week, we're talking about a history-making MSNBC lineup, a Sri Lankan resort run entirely by women, and a Muslim athlete changing the game, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. Let's get started. Welcome to the show, Toby. Welcome back to the show, Toby. Good to see you.
Thanks, Bernadette. Lovely to see you.
Can you tell folks a little bit about your work?
Yeah, so I'm based in the UK, if you can't tell by my accent. I run my own EDI consultancy. I spend most of my time working with heads of HR, developing their EDI strategies. And I also do lots of work with senior leaders on developing inclusive leadership skills and behaviors.
Awesome. And we talked a little bit about this before the show started, but things here in the US are kind of crazy, a lot of DEI backlash. How are things over there in the UK with your business?
So I think at the moment we're quite fortunate in that we're not quite experiencing the backlash or the tail end of what's going on in the US. Although I've had a few conversations with clients where they've got operations in the US and the UK, and they're really feeling under pressure to scale back what they're doing in the US. And they are having some internal conversations on whether that should reach into the UK. But I'm really fortunate that all of the clients that I've spoke to have said that they want to actually double down on their efforts in the UK, regardless of what's going on in the US.
Good. Stay the course, companies. Stay the course. It's short-sighted to pull back. That's great. I am so glad to hear that it's not really impacting things for you. So, you know what? I can't believe it's been 5 years since the start of COVID. What a journey. I mean, the whiplash we saw in our workplace was absolutely wild. I mean, we saw that. I mean, do you remember back in the beginning when we were all sort of getting used to Zoom and we saw kind of our complicated little worlds? We saw interruptions by kids and pets, and we kind of got to see a little bit behind the scenes and build more authentic connections with the people on our team. Was that sort of your experience?
Yeah, it was. It was really interesting. One thing I noticed was how quickly businesses enabled their people to work from home and remotely when perhaps for years they've been reluctant to allow their people to work. And one thing that really came to light was that we have to trust people and treat them like adults. And I suppose because of the pandemic, companies had no choice. For a lot of people, they had to work remotely. I also want to acknowledge that a lot of businesses have workforces that cannot work remotely, that have to be on the shop floor, so to speak. If you look at people that work in healthcare, you can't work. It's quite difficult to work as a remote surgeon, although future technology, who knows, surgeons will be able to perform procedures from home. I know that technology is starting to exist through robotic surgery techniques, but obviously a lot of people weren't able to work from home. So sometimes we have to just be mindful of the privilege that a lot of office-based workers have, or those working at head office, to be able to work flexibly. But yeah, it was a really interesting time.
It was, and I'm glad you mentioned folks who are on the shop floor, so to speak. I think, and healthcare workers. I think that is really important to remember. Sort of the privilege that we might have to have been in our bubble and to stay home. But I do think that it sort of caused us to lean in more to our humanity and to be more empathetic. I mean, there were so many deaths. We saw, I know people who lost family members and friends, right? I lost someone, that I knew back in the day. And so it sort of caused this sort of mass empathy, at least for a little while. And, in my conversations more recently with clients, it just seems that there's so much, even sort of regressive fear about being authentic at work and sharing our humanity at work. It just seems almost like we're not even going backwards. Like we're going like pre-COVID, but pre, like way back, it seems, at least in the conversations that I've had. I mean, I know folks who are not coming out of the closet, people in white collar jobs who are not coming out of the closet and not feeling safe.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting to look at the responses that companies are having now, because you were talking about coming out at work or remaining in the closet. I read a really interesting article recently about the number of university graduates who are open at university about being a member of the LGBTQ plus community. But when they start their first graduate job, they feel like they have to go back into the closet. And I just think that's a real shame. And it just goes to show the degree of psychological safety that employers have or don't have for people to feel comfortable in their own skin, to bring their whole selves to work, as the phrase goes.
Yeah.
And it is interesting because, like you were saying, I suppose at the top of this segment, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were peering into people's lives. We could suddenly see what their living room looked like,
Yeah.
and we could see their kids running around in the background, or their cat walking across the keyboard. And it did bring a certain degree of humanity into the workplace, I think.
Yeah, I want to get back to that. I feel like there's something that's really missing right now. There's a real disconnect. I have a tool that
Mm.
I use and teach in a lot of my keynotes, some of my workshops, called the ARC method, which stands for Ask, Respect, Connect. We'll put that in the show notes so folks can follow along and check it out. But essentially, it's a real simple model to become more curious about the folks on your team. Ask, respect, connect. And there are conversations and starters and stuff. So I'll make sure that gets in there. But we need this authentic connection to really build strong cultures, to create psychological safety, which we know is a driver of high performing teams.
Mm. Absolutely. It comes down to empathy as well, because I use an inclusive leadership framework that was created by a team of occupational psychologists, and it was based on a project that they did with the Metropolitan Police in London, and they were able to identify 6 key behaviours of an inclusive manager, and the first one is around empathy, and how important empathy is, and and on my podcast, actually, I interviewed somebody called Dr. Tara Van Bommel, who works for an organization called Catalyst. And she wrote a report, and she said something really interesting. She said she was talking about, quote unquote, the perfect storm that happened a few years ago when George Floyd was murdered over in the States. And organizations were thinking about how to become anti racist organizations. And then at the same time, they were grappling with the pandemic and thinking about how they respond and they look after the well-being of their employees. And Dr. Tara's research basically said that there were 2 key things that organizations needed. They needed authenticity, because if there's a lack of authenticity, people just see through that and they just don't believe you. They just don't believe that you've got their interests at heart, or that you're serious about creating an inclusive workplace.
Yep.
And then she was saying that the number one skill that managers needed to have to navigate these difficult times was empathy.
Absolutely. Well, we still need it. There are a lot of people struggling right now. A lot. So, all right, well, let's move into this week's good vibes. All right, the first story this week comes from Keandra Brown, who's a Duskanesk University basketball player and entrepreneur. Keandra is a Muslim woman who launched a modest athletic wear business after struggling to find comfortable, affordable options for Muslim women basketball players. So she created comfortable, longer body covering garments that she could wear to play basketball. She already had the hijab, and I think there are other firms that make sports hijabs. So she has created a new line of basketball wear for Muslim women. I love this.
Yeah, I love it too. I love it too. It was just, as I was reading that article, it was reminding me of there's this great professor over here at the University of Westminster called Dr. Pippa Cattrall. She does a lot of work around inclusive design and the built environment. And in one of her papers, she was talking about how we live in a patriarchal society and everything is developed through the male gaze. And it just got me thinking about how often things are designed in a non-inclusive way. If we're talking about sportswear there, but it's things like, if you look at things like uniforms or personal protective equipment, the construction industry, equipment like hard hats and high-vis jackets and shoes and things like that are designed for the male body. And actually, women who are then wearing PPE designed for men are putting themselves at danger because the PPE is not designed to fit properly. And I know, and I think this is an issue in the US, but this was a problem with like UK police forces. So stab vests, for example, were designed for the male body, and women were at more danger of being stabbed, even though they were wearing a stab vest, because it just didn't fit properly. So it just goes to show that this is a big story around inclusive design.
It is, and it's a safety issue in many cases, and in many cases, as you described, it can be a matter of life or death. So absolutely, we have to sort of involve people in the process who are part of those communities so that products can be more inclusive.
Definitely.
All right. The second story comes from MSNBC, which is a news network here in the U.S. It made history with Jonathan Capehart and Eugene Daniels as the first two out gay Black men to co-host a major news network program. So they're joining The Weeknd, a revamped panel show. So this is great. It's a big step for representation, but let's just call MSNBC out because they did just fire Joy Reid, who's a Black woman, leaving MSNBC's primetime lineup without any hosts of color. So a little bit of a mixed bag, but we'll take the win.
Yeah, it's good. I'm not familiar with that. I'm not that familiar with MSNBC, with me being over in the UK. But this is an important story for representation. But also, I think it's an important story acknowledging intersectionality. That they've got two presenters who are Black and part of the LGBTQ plus community. And I think often when we think about diversity, we think it very much in silos. And we don't really think about the intersectional characteristics that the individuals hold.
I agree. That's absolutely an excellent point. You're right. And I think that these are men who can be possibility models. I can imagine that there are some young Black gay boys who are like, I want to be like that when I grow up, right? And that stuff matters. We can't diminish that. It's so important.
Yeah, and I can't remember who said this, but there's that famous quote of you cannot be what you cannot see.
Exactly.
And so representation and having role models in the public eye is incredibly important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't know any lesbians when I was a kid. That is for sure. All right. The third story this week comes from Sri Lanka, which has an Amba Yalu resort, which is flipping the script on gender norms in tourism, becoming the country's first hotel fully staffed and managed by 75 women. It's also one of the few in the world that is entirely run by women. In an industry where women only make up 10% of the workforce, this hotel provides crucial opportunities for economic dependence and leadership development. This is so, so cool.
Yeah, it sounds really good. And I think I would be keen to make sure that this particular organization is kind of treating it as a training ground, so
Hmm.
that so that these women that are working for the organization get to go and work in the rest of the industry and grow in the industry, especially if they, as there's that underrepresentation.
Yeah, that's actually part of what they're offering is leadership
Mm,
development program, a leadership development program. So hopefully, yeah, so they can go on and grow and build wealth as they move on with their careers. I
yeah,
hope. That's
yeah,
all, you never know with these stories, but I obviously have a lot of hope.
yeah, absolutely.
The fourth story comes from China, where several Chinese labor unions have issued official notices banning employers from asking woman job seekers about their marital or childbearing status. So, this move challenges entrenched workplace discrimination, where women often face hiring bias in China due to pregnancy fears. Now, of course, there's the risk that discrimination will go underground, be a little bit more subtle, but we've got to change the systems.
Yeah, I'm deeply shocked that this hasn't happened already. I mean, for a very long time in the UK, it's been unlawful to do so as part of the
Right.
recruitment process. So it's great that China are catching up.
I know. I mean, listen, let's be honest. About half the stories on any given week are fall into the category of better late than never, right?
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
take the wins. Okay, the last story this week comes from Pittsburgh International Airport here in the US. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has introduced an on site childcare center exclusively for its employees, which is addressing a significant barrier to workplace participation. So, only about 12% of American workers have access to employer sponsored childcare, and very few of them have on site facilities. This program or this facility offers rates 10% below the market average, and the airport has seen talent retention as a result.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing benefit, and I only wish more businesses did this. I used to work for an American healthcare technology company based over here in the UK, but I used to fly to Kansas City quite a lot to work out of Kansas City, and we had a whole campus, and we had an on-site crash, and up to, I think it was like kindergarten level, but I know that it was an incredibly well received and used facility or benefit for employees who had childcare responsibilities. Um, and I just think it's a no-brainer. I know how difficult it is in the UK for parents to access childcare. It's very expensive as well. They don't get a great amount of financial assistance from the government, so parents have to make some very difficult decisions about whether to give up work or look after their children, and sometimes it's difficult to do both. So having an on-site facility like that is just amazing.
It is, it's absolutely amazing and shocking how rare it is. It's a
Mm,
great win win. I mean, I remember when my son was that age, I think we were paying upwards of $2,000 a month.
mm,
It's
yeah,
not. It's not a little. Like it is a lot. It adds up really quickly. So it matters so much, and the convenience factor matters so much, and it allows more time for the parent to be with the child. They don't have to drop off and pick up somewhere
mm,
that's out of the way.
mm.
Okay, let's move into this week's good vibes to go. I'm going to share a good vibe to go, and then I'll invite you to share a good vibe to go. So, in the spirit of intersectionality, learn about LGBTQ plus people who shaped history through a compelling video series from Anna Deshawn from E3 Radio, who is a previous guest on Five Things, and Amanda W. Timpson from Yesterqueers. They bring history to life with powerful stories of queer resilience, activism, and artistry. And you'll learn about more about intersectionality, the types of identities that sort of come together and create our stories. And we'll put that in the show notes. What is your good vibe to go, Toby?
So there's some really positive news for people that speak using British Sign Language over here in the UK. So until recently, environmental words like sustainability or the climate crisis and deforestation didn't have any representation in British Sign Language. And that meant that deaf people often had to rely on fingerspelling them. But now, thanks to a project that's been spearheaded by the University of Edinburgh's Scottish Sensory Centre, 400 new signs for environmental science terms have been developed. And this makes the topic far more accessible, especially for deaf children going through education. The glossary is an open and evolving resource, and it's had nearly 370,000 hits in the past year. It's already being used by interpreters in Scottish Parliament, on TV, and in classrooms across schools, colleges, and universities.
Love it. All right. Well, it has been a treat having you on the show, Toby. Thanks so much for joining us. And how can folks get in touch with you?
So either just connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me a message, or have a look at my website, mildon.co.uk.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been a treat. Hope you have a great week. Folks, hope you have a great week. And if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.